All right, so in this unit, we started off talking about microscopes because part of what we're going to be doing this week is looking at cells through the microscope. Now we're talking about cells, and then we have another section of this unit that we'll do after that. So why did we have to do microscopes before we talked about cells? Calvin? Yeah, because it wasn't until microscopes were invented that people were able to actually discover and see and study cells. Because cells are so small and they're typically microscopic, that people didn't really know much about cells until the middle of the 1600s when people started using microscopes to look at things. So these are some images of various cells that we're going to be looking at in the course of this unit. We'll look at all of these types of cells. Yeah, Megan?
Are the purple cells part of an onion?
They are. They're part of a red onion. Those purplish onions you buy at the grocery store, yeah. These are human cheek cells. These are Elodia cells. These are regular onion cells. All right, so just to summarize, we talked about this a little bit when we introduced the characteristics of life. Cells are the basic unit of life. They are what all life is made out of. And they're found in every living organism. Anything that is alive is made of cells. One of the defining characteristics. And so it wasn't until the middle of the 1600s, really, when scientists started to really study cells. Because what was necessary first? Microscopes. And the 1600s are when microscopes started to be produced. First person that's sort of credited as having seen cells, scientist name of Robert Hooke. And Robert Hooke was looking, he looked at lots of things, but the thing he's famous for is looking at sections of this under the microscope. What is this? Pass it around. No?
Wood?
A type? What?
It's
Cork. Cork comes from the bark of a tree, so from a living organism. And Robert Hooke took very thin slices of cork and looked at them under a microscope. And it looked like this. These are some drawings from his publication. Okay? This was in 1665. Now, what you're passing around is made of cells that were once living. They're no longer alive, this piece of cork. But what Hooke saw were these little sort of boxes. He saw that the cork was made of these small compartments. They reminded him of the rooms that monks slept in a monastery. And they were called cells. And so he called what he saw under the microscope cells. And he is the person that gave these things the name of cells. It was another scientist, Anton van Leeuwenhoek. He was the first that's credited with seeing living cells because the cells in the cork were not alive. And Leeuwenhoek was doing his work a little bit later than Robert Hooke. Leeuwenhoek was kind of an interesting guy. He was very, very secretive, and he was able to produce very high-quality lenses using techniques that nobody knew about. And he was very secretive. He wouldn't show anybody how he made these lenses. But he was able to see things that no other scientist was able to see. So he looked at things like a sample of pond water. And in that pond water, he saw that there's actually tiny little organisms living and moving in there. They're single-celled organisms that you could not see just by looking at it with the naked eye. Okay? And so he saw these living things. He looked at blood samples and saw that blood is not just like a red liquid, it's actually a clearish colored liquid, and inside of it are these blood cells sort of floating along. Okay? He looked at semen and saw living sperm cells moving around inside of it. So he saw all these various types of living cells through his microscopes. Now his microscopes look probably nothing like you're imagining. These are the microscopes he made. This is what they looked like. So the way his microscopes worked is he made these tiny little spherical pieces of glass that could give great magnification, up to 300 times with a single lens. Those were mounted here in this metal. It's a tiny little glass lens. And then there was this needle that sort of went right up near that. That's where you would put your sample. And then these knobs would move it to focus the image. Okay? And you would look through from the other side at this object. Okay? And so that was Leeuwenhoek. Here's what he looked like, sometimes called the first microbiologist because he studied microscopic living organisms. His birthday just passed, and last year was on October 24th. You know how Google changes their little logo sometimes for special occasions? Well, on October 24th last year, they made the Google Doodle, I think is what it's called, Leeuwenhoek. That's Leeuwenhoek. And you see him holding up that kind of microscope that he made and looked at these living creatures. So it was kind of neat because we were doing this unit with the regular 7th graders on October 24th, and we were like just happened to line up perfectly when we did that. So it's kind of neat to see. So after Leeuwenhoek, lots of other scientists studied cells from all sorts of different organisms and all different contexts. They started to put together these ideas into what's called the cell theory, which is basically, here's what we know about cells, the very basic things. Okay? And there's sort of 3 parts to the cell theory. First off is that all life is made of 1 or more cells. The second part is that cells are the smallest form of life. There are creatures that are made of a single cell, like amoeba, protists, bacteria. There are also organisms made of trillions of cells, like a human. The last is about where these cells come from. And this sort of goes along with what we learned in spontaneous generation. Cells come from other cells. Cells are able to reproduce, to copy their genetic material and form new cells.
Is that like when the seed got cut or skin?
Exactly. So if you get a cut, okay, and you separate the tissue of your skin into 2 sections, you have a wound. The way that cut heals is that the skin cells in that area start reproducing and forming new skin cells, which eventually fill in the gap. Same reason why you're growing taller. Okay? Your bone cells are reproducing, causing your bones to elongate. Same thing in your muscles and so forth. Okay? And so cells come from other cells. Bill?
So why do you stop growing?
What's that?
Why do you stop growing?
Eventually your body stops producing growth hormone, is what stimulates your bones to grow and elongate. And that's a hormonal change that happens as you're adolescent, as a child. And eventually that sort of stops as you reach full-grown adulthood. So inside of our body, so inside of us, a living organism, we have a heart, we have kidneys, and 2 lungs, and a liver, and a pancreas. What would we call all those things? Organs. And an organ in our body is a part within our body. Each organ has a certain job to do to help us stay alive. Well, that same idea can be translated into cells, because inside of a single individual cells are little parts that have a certain job to do. And we don't call them organs when they're inside of a cell, we call them organelles. Are these small parts within cells that have specific functions to do.
How tiny are they?
They are small, obviously smaller than a cell. They're on the order of, it depends on the organelle. Some are really, really small, a few micrometers. Some are much larger, so it sort of depends on the organelle. And we're going to spend the next 4 or 5 slides talking about these organelles and listing them, telling about what they do, where they are located, what they look like, and so forth.
What was the last part of that slide?
What's that?
What was the last
And so when we talk about cells for our purposes, we're just going to say, talk about plant and animal cells. Now really, there's huge variety. An animal cell doesn't just look like what we're about to show you. We're kind of generalizing. A skin cell looks different from a muscle cell, which looks different from a nerve cell. They have different parts. We're just kind of simplifying things for our purposes. So we're going to split cells into sort of two categories, plant cells and animal cells, which are mostly similar, but there's some important differences. All right, so organelle is a part within a cell with a job to do. So we have our two cells here. One of them is an animal cell, one is a plant cell. Anyone want to guess which is which? Tell me a reason why you're saying that, Anthony?
The left is the plant cell becomes food.
Okay, yeah, you're correct. This is the plant cell. One way you can tell is that it's green. Many plant cells are green, not all, but many. And this is an animal cell. A couple other things that kind of clue you in is the shape. Plant cells can often be squarish or rectangular, have like straight lines, whereas animal cells are usually sort of roundish. They have a flexible shape. Also, some of the parts are different. There's a couple parts in this plant cell that are not present in the animal cell. So let's start talking about some of these organelles, these parts. First one is the cell wall. The cell wall is found only in the plant cell. I mean, it is found in bacteria and fungi, but we're not really talking about those right now. And it's kind of the outermost layer of the plant cell, but it's made of this thick, sort of stiff, woody material called cellulose. And when you were passing around this cork, this is all cellulose. What you're holding is really just the remaining cell wall of these plant cells. All the internal parts are gone. Okay. And it gives the plant sort of its shape and its structure. But really, it's sort of like a non-living shell around the cell. It's not really alive, a cell wall. It sort of forms, and then it's just kind of a shell. It's kind of like if you had like hair or fingernails or something like that, like they're produced by your body, but they're technically not alive. So that's this outer layer. It's pretty thick, but it's only there in the plant cell. The outer layer here in the animal cell is the cell membrane, but it is also present in the plant cell. It's the next layer inside of the cell wall. So plants have a cell wall and they have a cell membrane just inside of it. And this diagram is kind of this lighter color just along the outside. Cell membrane is an important part. Okay? It's very thin, it's flexible. It does several things. For our purposes, we're going to say its main job is to regulate things moving into and out of the cell. The cell membrane sort of controls what can enter or leave the cell. Now, there will be a question on a quiz at some point that some of you are going to get wrong. And the question is something like, what is the outermost living part of a plant cell? Many of you will say cell wall. That is incorrect, because it is not alive. Outermost living layer of a plant cell is the cell membrane. Filling up the cell, kind of holding the other parts in place, is the cytoplasm. Cytoplasm kind of fills up the cell. And these diagrams, it's like in blue here. The stuff where you don't see anything else, or it's light green in the plant cell. That's cytoplasm. Like, did anyone ever eat that dessert that's like Jell-O with like chunks of fruit stuck in it? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
That would be kind of like, you imagine the Jell-O is the cytoplasm, and then the chunks of fruit are the organelles, the other organelles that are being held there. I don't eat Jell-O. It's not vegetarian.
Is Jones a vegetarian?
It is not.
Why?
It's made of like hooves and bones and
Yeah.
skin and stuff.
That's why
It has
these are
gelatin in it.
devil
from-
Yeah, because
Oh,
it's made of gelatin,
Oh, I remember
which is you
that.
take all the leftover parts of animals that have been used for meat, you boil them up, skim off the layer, smelly layer of collagen that collects at the top,
You know,
and that's gelatin.
I remember eating a regular. Oh, I hate Jello. I don't like Jello when it goes.
All right, anyway,
Jones doesn't tell you what's in
It looks
there.
like eyes. What?
so here are these animal or plant cells I'm showing you?
Animal.
These are animal cells. So what would you say is this outermost layer?
Cell membrane.
That's the cell membrane. Animal cells don't have a cell wall. What is the white stuff? Cytoplasm. The dark area we're going to talk about next is the nucleus. Okay, we don't see the other organelles in this image. Often they're too small or they're just not colored in any way. They're transparent, right?
You said that animals that have cell membranes. Then why? Wait.
Animals have a cell membrane, not a cell wall.
Oh,
All right, an important part of the cell is the nucleus. Okay, the nucleus sometimes is thought of as the control center of the cell because there's some very important stuff inside of the nucleus. We'll talk about that in a second. When we go back here, this is the nucleus of the plant cell. This is the nucleus of the animal cell. It's usually one of the larger organelles. It's roundish usually. And it has a few parts. Okay? The outermost layer of the nucleus is this area. It's called the nuclear membrane. Sometimes it's called the nuclear envelope. And this nuclear membrane basically separates the nucleus from the rest of the cell. And what do you see? What's on it? Little polka dots. Those are holes called pores. Those pores allow some things to get out of the nucleus while other things cannot get out.
Oh, that's a part of our skin, like, was human holes in our skin?
Sort of, those are called pores as well, because a pore just means a hole in something. So that's the outer layer. Now inside of the nucleus, what's most important are these things. They often look like X's. Those are the chromosomes. What do you know about chromosomes? Anna?
They're like, it's something that also makes up life, or it's
How were we going to say?
It's the DNA.
Yeah, they are made of DNA. They contain our genetic information. Our chromosomes, our DNA makes us who we are. In each of your body cells, you have 46 chromosomes. 23 of them you inherited from your mother, and 23 from your father. Chromosomes are what get passed on from generation to generation.
If you have a mutation, how many do you have from your parents?
Well, a mutation is a change within one individual chromosome, so you still have the same number. We'll talk when we get to genetics. We'll talk about there can be abnormalities in chromosome number. For example, Down syndrome is when a person has one extra 21st chromosome. Also inside of the nucleus is this dark area here. It's the nucleolus. That means little nucleus. Its job is to make another organelle called the ribosome, which we'll talk about momentarily. So those are all parts within the nucleus. All right, I'll try and finish these last few organelles here on this slide. So one organelle is the endoplasmic reticulum. It's kind of a mouthful. We abbreviate it oftentimes as saying ER. And the ER is a series of tubes in the cell, often located near the nucleus. And what happens is the ER makes with another organelle and transports things within the cell. There's two types of ER, the rough ER, which has these spots on it, and the smooth ER, which does not. To help people remember what these organelles do, sometimes I try to come up with ways. Like what else is abbreviated ER? Emergency room. What you can remember is if you get injured somewhere, you have to be transported to the ER, the emergency room. The ER transport substances. These dots on the ER are actually ribosomes. And ribosomes' job is to make protein, which is what most living organisms are made of. Proteins make up the majority of our body. And these tiny little parts called ribosomes are responsible for making those proteins. To remember this, I tell people the first 3 letters of ribosome spells what word? Yeah, you guys like to eat ribs? They're meat, which is mostly protein. Ribs, protein. All right. Finally, our last organelle, the Golgi bodies. Oh, sorry, the ribosomes can be found on the ER or floating around free. The last organelle are the Golgi bodies. And their job is to be like the post office of the cell. They package up proteins that are going to be shipped out of the cell and released. Kind of like the post office. If you're familiar with the band Fish, anybody?
Yes.
They also have a song named after these. Another word for a Golgi apparatus. Someday I'll make you listen to
I'm
the song.
sure
Wait,
it's my
wait,
Fish, P-H-I-S-H.
It's your dress.
Oh, nice,
This is from the
perfect.
Baker's Dozen
Oh,
show.
cool.
My
Did you
dad
go?
got-
There's a
No, my
band
dad
named
got
Fish.
Yes, there is a band Fish.
Wow.
I say to recognize them in the cell, they look like a stack of pancakes with drops of delicious grade A amber maple syrup.
Oh my gosh,
Or no.
what's the fish song called?
Golgi apparatus.
It is?
They also mention lysosomes in the song. Well,
What was the last word on the page?
the last word on the last page. Oh wait, let me explain this. So, the way that the Golgi bodies work, the ER makes proteins, send them off to the Golgi bodies, which packages them up into these little bubbles, which then exit the cell. Perfect timing. All right, have a good day.